with the requirement as stipulated in House Rule 67 regarding sexual and other unlawful harassment and discrimination prevention training. Therefore, I move that Representative Kevin Verville be reprimanded by the House of Representatives.
Representative Verville, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
You're welcome.
Thank you, honorable colleagues. First thing I want to say is I tried to file paperwork of a conflict of interest. I don't want to vote on this motion. I don't want to vote for or against myself, but I was informed that if I did that, I wouldn't be able to speak in my defense. So could
I just ask the minister to suspend? By all means, I would allow the member. I just wanted, for the record, and if it should ever happen in the future, I would allow.
I'm sorry.
It was a declaration of intent. I'm sorry, I stand corrected by a very able clerk. If there is a conflict of interest on your behalf, you're absolutely right, and I apologize for interrupting you. But I didn't want you to.
So is the ruling of the chair that I have to vote?
There's no ruling of the chair. I'm just a busybody interrupting
then a parliamentary inquiry, if I could.
So go right ahead.
Mr. Chair, would it be appropriate for me to not vote in motions brought for or against me before this body, as to vote for myself seems as a conflict of interest?
There'd be the ruling of the chair that it would not be a conflict of interest. You would definitely have a right to vote.
No, I don't want. Can I have the right to not vote on motions brought for or against me? Should a roll call be?
If you have to leave the chamber, because of course you can't be present and not vote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I cannot command your attention in this hall, but I beg for it. Perhaps you've noticed me going back and forth, even upstairs into the gallery today, to observe our proceedings. And what do I see? I see cell phones. I see laptops. I see tablets. I've seen people reading novels. For such a solemn occasion, it seems that I should be able to get the attention of the House, the full attention of the House, for the brief remarks that I give in my own defense, if one wants to call it a defense. Let us make no mistake, and this is before I get through my remarks, let us make no mistakes. This has nothing to do with the subject matter of the class, the education and training that is demanded. That is good training. It is quality training. It is valuable training. And I'll get to that more later. That is not what this is about. Mr. Speaker, stop me if you've heard this one before. House rules are whatever the House says they are.
I've heard this one before.
I have too.
Oh, go right ahead, though. Please proceed.
But then I realized that's not really true. That's not true. What does the House say that the rules are? House Rule 64 states, sources of authority. The procedures of the New Hampshire House shall be derived from the following sources in the order of precedence listed. A, constitutional provisions. B, rules of the House, the New Hampshire House. C, customs, usage, and precedent. D, adopted parliamentary manual, that's Mason's, 2010. And E, statutory provisions. So, House rules rightly point to the supremacy of the New Hampshire State Constitution. I'm all in on that. We got that right. So what does the New Hampshire State Constitution say House rules are? The New Hampshire State Constitution states in Part 2, Article 2, that the House of Representatives shall choose their own Speaker, appoint their own officers, and settle the rules of their proceedings. Settle the rules of proceedings in their own House, and shall be the judge of returns, elections, and qualifications of its members, as pointed out in this Constitution. So it's clear. and there can be no doubt, that the Constitution of the state of New Hampshire is the overriding framework for the creation of House rules, and that the House rules must be in accordance with our state Constitution. The New Hampshire Constitution is quite clear that House rules are for proceedings, and proceedings only. Nothing more, nothing less. There are currently 111 House rules, of which 110 are specific to the proceedings of the House. To get a flavor for House rules, because sometimes we forget, and reading by section titles only, because that's how we like to operate, House rules are divided up as follows. Duties of the Speaker, decorum and debate, committees and their duties, bills, committee of the whole House, that was a fun day, order of business, officers and personnel, miscellaneous, and we're going to come back to that one in a little bit, committee procedure, and last but not least, definitions. Under miscellaneous, we find Rule 63, deadly weapons, electronic devices, cameras. Rule 64, we're familiar with that, right? That's the sources of authority. Rule 65, House deadlines. A lot of deadlines in the rules. A lot of dates certain. Rule 66, subpoena power. I suppose perhaps that's what the certified letter was in a way. I don't know. Rule 67, harassment training. Rule 67, well intended, is a new and unprecedented rule, adopted at the beginning of the 2019 session, and is the only rule that does not pertain to House proceedings. Rule 67 reads, all legislators, legislative officers, and legislative staff shall attend in-person education and training regarding sexual and unlawful harassment and discrimination. Rule 67 is not a rule of proceedings, and therefore is an unconstitutional and unenforceable mandate. And it's for this reason, and this reason alone, that this body should not find me in noncompliance with House rules. How can anyone be found in noncompliance with something that is not constitutionally valid? I swore an oath to uphold the Constitution of the state of New Hampshire, and I have upheld that oath. And I have followed legitimate House rules and will continue to do so. Here's the problem. What are the limits of further mandates of action that a simple majority of House members may impose upon members of the body? This is a very slippery slope, a slippery slope of which I shall refuse to take the first step. The good member from Milford who went first, God bless you, sir. God bless you. It was moving testimony. And he gave you a glimpse of your future, didn't he? Didn't he? Because he told you what he wants the next step on the slippery slope to be, right? So shall a simple majority of the House mandate education and training regarding, I don't know, things like constitutional authority? Because at this point, I would say that would be a good one. Meaning no offense to any member of this august body, myself included. I'm not as fit as I may appear. Perhaps first aid, CPR, and AED training might be a higher priority for this body. I don't know. Imagine the day, if you dare, and I know many of you don't, and I don't blame you. Imagine the day when the other side of the aisle takes the majority and mandates things like firearm safety training. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How about a lesson in Austrian economics? You guys familiar with Austrian? Perhaps we should go the other way. Because I clearly am deficient in Keynesian economics. I don't have any idea how one pushes string. So perhaps I need training there. Maybe next year, should I be reelected, should I even choose to run, right? Maybe I need training in Keynesian economics to be able to do the understanding of some of these bills that have been brought before this body. I don't know. Make no mistake about it, and this is important. I have successfully completed the education and training by Rule 67. And I have a form right here in my jacket pocket and stapled to the back of the very notes in my hand from my employer to prove it. I will present such evidence to anyone who shall request it. But I shall not submit it to the House for the purposes of complying with Rule 67, an unconstitutional rule. Thank you. I will go so far to disavow such proof should anyone swear to the Speaker of the House or maybe the clerk that they have witnessed my evidence demonstrating compliance with House Rule 67. It is appropriate, after all, for an employer to require such training of employees. New Hampshire state representatives are neither employees of the state of New Hampshire, nor are we employees of the New Hampshire House of Representatives. It's not in my notes, but technically, we're not even co-workers, right? Sometimes I work diligently at odds with many people in this room to advance an agenda that you don't agree with. We are elected officials accountable to our constituents. I believe that such training would be appropriate to include in the House orientation training provided to every member every 2 years. If you want to do that, that's where it belongs. So, how is it that this House shall now deem House members, myself, in nonconformance with House Rule 67, when there is no mandate to demonstrate proof of compliance in this rule, within the rule, or any of the other rules? There's nothing that mandates that I give you this form for proof of compliance. That's not in there. Every time-sensitive House rule has listed a date certain by which compliance must be met. Given that there is no date certain by which compliance must be met, then it is reasonable to assume, and the Speaker disagrees, I understand that, but it's reasonable to assume that the deadline is simply prior to the end of our term. The end of our term is a date certain, right? We all know when that is. After which date, the question is moot. So we have a rule. We have Rule 63. And I want to draw our attention to the end of Rule 63. With the exception of devices for hearing impaired, no member shall operate audible electronic transmitting and/or receiving devices, nor shall any member operate a video camera or a camera utilizing flash bulbs on the floor of the House while the House is in session. Well, we all are. I am too. I can. On that one, I'll confess my guilt. For that one, certainly. But many of you will say, well, no representative from Deerfield. You forget. You forget that in the beginning of the session, the Speaker gave us all a dispensation, right? That, well, you can use those devices as long as, well, I guess nobody thinks you're violating the rule. So we have a rule that means something other than what the rule says, right? So we have a rule against these devices I can see right now in use, right? But then I have a rule that doesn't mandate that I show any proof I've complied. So now we have rules that mean things that aren't written in them. I am terribly confused as to how I am supposed to operate under House rules when some rules mean things that they don't say and other rules mean things that they don't say. I don't know. So, let us consider House Rule 64 one more time. House Rule 64 states, sources of authority. The procedures of the New Hampshire House shall be derived from the following sources in order of precedence listed. Constitution, rules of the New Hampshire House, custom, usage, and precedent. Custom, usage, and precedent. Adopted parliamentary manual, which is Mason's 2010 statutory provisions. So, it is clear from my previous remarks, and in fact, from memory, I think the remarks of everyone here, that I am in willful noncompliance with Rule 67. I am in willful noncompliance, Rule 67. So this motion proposes to reprimand me for nonconformance. So shall the precedent of this House, in this House assembled today, shall we set the precedent that a willful violation of House rules be punishable by reprimand? That's the question in front of you, right? I was cautioned by colleagues that I respect and admire from both sides of the aisle, don't poke the bear. Representative, don't poke the bear. And I didn't poke the bear. The bear poked me. I'm sitting up back there trying to mind my own business. I'm not perfect, I admit it, right? The bear poked me. So now, that's the precedent, because we talked about precedent earlier today. This is setting precedent. This is not to be taken lightly, right? This precedent may have long-lasting and far-reaching consequences for the future of our state government and this House in particular. And it's not in my notes. And I certainly would not expect it from the Speaker today. God bless you. You do a good job, and I appreciate it. But imagine that the precedent now is that if a Speaker of the House willfully violates House rules, the precedent is reprimand. That's what it is. So what's our recourse? All right? How do we diffuse the situation? Vote your conscience. That's what I always say. I won't blame anybody for any vote they take. I'll disagree with them, but I won't blame them. But I urge you to vote against the current motion. Let us put an end to this distraction and get on with the business at hand, the actual business that we've been sent here to do. No person should be forced to comply with an unconstitutional mandate, and no person should be punished for refusing to comply with an unconstitutional mandate. Mr. Speaker, thank you.
The members welcome. House will be in order.